This is the last part, and probably the part most people are most concerned about, and that is the parenting plan. Now, for anyone here who is not getting a dissolution of marriage, the parenting plan action can stand alone. You can bring a parenting plan action if you have children with someone, even though you're not married to them. And then the top of your case, instead of saying on your court papers, in re the marriage of Jane Doe and John Doe, will say in re the parenting of, and have your children's initials. And then it'll have you as the petitioner and respondent in that action. So a parenting plan doesn't have to be part of a divorce. It can be a separate proceeding. The parenting plan is what we used to call custody. We don't have custody and visitation in Montana anymore. I will probably accidentally use those terms, but we have parenting plans and parenting time instead. This includes where the children will live most of the time, when they'll spend time with the other parent, who will pay if the children have to travel for parenting time, and anything else that has to do with the kids. The parenting plan is supposed to be decided based on the best interests of the children. And Montana cares enough about that they actually spell it out in the statutes. And if you're one of those people that looks everything up on the internet, this is the Montana Code Annotated Section 40-4-212. And it gives a list. And while the list is not everything that can be considered, it's a pretty good list of the considerations that the court will make. The court will consider the wishes of the parents, the wishes of the child, how the child interacts with the parents and their siblings and anybody else who's significantly involved with the child's life, the child's adjustment to their home, their school, and their community, the mental and physical health of all the people involved, physical abuse or threat of physical abuse against a parent or a child, chemical dependency on the part of either parent, continuity and stability of care. That means the court likes it if the kids have stability and aren't uprooted. The child's developmental needs, especially if the child has special needs. The court does not like it if a parent has purposely not helped pay for birth-related expenses that they could have paid for, or failed to support them in other ways. The court likes the child to have frequent and continuing contact with both parents, assuming that that's appropriate under the circumstances. The court will take into consideration whether anyone in the household has been convicted of certain crimes. Those would include crimes like homicide, rape, and child abuse types of crimes. And the court doesn't like parents to run into court over and over again fighting over the parenting plan. So it will frown on continued actions once a parenting plan has been decided. Now, I can't give you any definitive answer for how anybody's specific circumstance is going to turn out. But I can say the court will take evidence on anything that has to do with the best interests of the child. The court will listen to expert witnesses on issues like chemical dependency, mental health issues, partner family member assault issues, threats that anyone has heard, other physical health issues that might impact the kids' special needs, those sorts of things. And then if you haven't been able to arrive at a decision yourselves or with the help of mediation, the court will make a decision based on these and any other factors that might apply to your specific circumstances. I've had cases where we had children who were severely physically handicapped, and that was important to the child in terms of making sure the child got proper care and those sorts of things. The court wants the kids to be in as safe a place as possible and to have their best interests served, but they also want both parents to have as much contact with the children as is in their best interests. So those are some of the factors that the court will look at. If you are disagreeing about where the children should be and how they should spend time with the other parent before you're getting to the end of the divorce, you can ask for what's called an interim parenting plan, and that means a temporary plan. You can make a proposal and ask the court to decide what the temporary arrangement should be. They call that an interim plan here in Montana. Also included in the parenting plan, you have to have child support. It's absolutely required by the state that child support be decided. Child support enforcement, an agency of the state, is usually the entity that makes the child support determination. They're pretty good at it. They're pretty good at finding people if you don't know where the children's parent who should be paying support is. They have access to resources that those of us in private practice could only dream about. They can find people by their social security numbers and other things that are a lot harder to do if you're in private practice. They have access to nationwide employment records and things like that. The child support in Montana is basically a mathematical computation. There's a computer program into which numbers are put in terms of income and things like insurance expenses that will be taken into account, and certain other extraordinary expenses might be considered, like employment expenses and those sorts of things. And then at the end, you get a number for what each parent's child support obligation is. The parent who has the children live with them most of the time receives support from the other parent, usually. It kind of depends on how the incomes shake out. If one parent has a much higher income than the other, sometimes the calculations get a little complicated based on where the kids are living. But it is a sort of, if you can do algebra, that's how the child support calculation works. You cannot waive child support and have the parent, the other parent, just leave the child's life. I get questions about, well, he's willing to just waive his rights as long as and not pay child support. That's not how it works in Montana. There's no way to waive your rights and get out of paying child support. The state views the support as something the child is entitled to. So they don't view it as something that either parent can waive on behalf of the child. So the other thing is that in Montana, you can't give up your rights to a child without giving them up to someone. So for instance, after you're divorced, if one of you remarries and you want to consider a step-parent adoption, then you can give up your rights. But you can't just give up your rights generally. So that just doesn't work in Montana. The other thing that's required in the child support calculation is that some provision be made for health care for the children. So there has to be something in the child support portion of your parenting plan about how the children's health care needs will be met, whether that's through insurance, through Medicaid, through the parents dividing the costs, whatever. It has to be in there. The other interesting thing, usually kids will visit their grandparents or extended family while they're with that parent who's related to those people. But in some cases, grandparents can petition for their own visitation with a child. They have to show the court it's in the child's best interests, and then the court can award them their own separate visitation. That doesn't happen very often. I've seen it in a few cases where the parent, say the grandparents live here in Billings and the parent lives across the country. So the grandparents are available to have visitation. Usually people work this out informally and don't need to have an order. Sometimes there's enough animosity between people that they need to have a court order to get that taken care of. So just be aware that it's a possibility. If you were never married to the children's parent, as I mentioned, you can bring the action separately. One interesting factor, if you are bringing this action without a divorce being involved, is that the child has to be represented by a guardian who is not their mother or father. There has to be a separate person that represents the interests of the child. So that will have to be a hurdle that's overcome. At the end of this case, a parenting proceeding that's separate, the court will enter a parenting plan, and it's an order just like any other court order that can be enforced and carried out. One thing I caution you about when you're trying to figure out your parenting plan and who's going to have the children and what the circumstances are going to be and so on, don't agree to something that thinking to yourself, well, they're never going to actually do this. I'll say that the kid's mom can have them every other weekend because she's never going to actually take them every other weekend. And then it turns out, hey, she is taking them every other weekend. And then you're saying, well, I didn't really think she'd do it, and so I don't think this is really good for the kids. If nothing new has happened, if the person that you don't want to have visiting the kids hasn't done, the father or mother as it may be, if they haven't done anything new that's bad or that is not in the best interest of the children, the court's not going to change an order that you agreed to. So keep in mind that I've had several people who've come to me saying, well, I agreed to all that because I never thought they'd actually do it. I never thought they'd show up. I never thought they'd try to enforce it. And you're not thinking that they would exercise their rights is not grounds to change the order. And finally, if you have a parenting plan and either parent is going to move so that it affects the parenting plan, say you both live in Billings and you've entered into your parenting plan and everything's going smoothly, and one of you is going to move to Virginia. Obviously, if you've been visiting every other weekend and one night during the week, that's not going to work anymore when you live in Virginia. The person who's moving has a responsibility of notifying the other person at least 30 days before they move and proposing a new parenting plan. And that would include when the kids are going to visit, how it's going to be paid for, all those things. If the parent who is notified doesn't do anything within those 30 days, the new proposed parenting plan becomes the new parenting plan. So once you've gotten notice that a person wants to change the parenting plan because of a move, then the burden shifts to you to take action to say yes or no and propose something else and go back to court or mediation if necessary. In your regular parenting plan, if you already know you live far enough apart that parenting time is going to be divided and require driving or flying, try to make provision for that in your parenting plan. A very common provision is that each parent pays for and arranges the transportation that brings the child to them. So when a parent wants to start the visit, they need to come and get the child or make those arrangements. When the visit's over, then the other parent would have to go get the child. Now, a lot of people are able to work out sharing the cost of plane tickets, meeting halfway, making whatever arrangement works for them. Sometimes the only practical thing is for the visiting parent to take the kid both ways. Sometimes people can't afford that, so you just have to be creative and work with each other to try to figure out what is going to work. There's no magic here. It's figuring out what will work for you. But you do have to take that into consideration when you're doing the parenting plan. And then you have to be willing to live with it. You have to be able to do it. Because I've certainly had cases where people have made the arrangements for the child to come to them and the other parent has refused to put the child on the plane or refused to give them the child or whatever. And the court takes a very dim view of blocking visitation that way. So it's a big thing to take into consideration. And especially now, it's so expensive to transport the kids. It's a huge burden, so take it into consideration. I made some earlier comments about keeping the kids out of the divorce or the parenting plan. Where you have kids together, I think that's even more important. Kids will have very divided loyalties, and it's very, very difficult for them. So even if you think they're asleep or totally absorbed in watching SpongeBob or whatever the current popular cartoon is, remember that they hear you in ways that you just can't even imagine. I have a niece who's now 29, and her parents got divorced when she was 3. And really, it was a fairly amicable divorce by most people's standards. But she can tell us today things she overheard her mom or her dad saying about the other one. And it stuck with her all these years. So she's my example of how they truly do soak things up that you don't think they're paying any attention to.